Welcome to the deep dive, everyone.
Glad to be here.
Yeah, we are really excited to have you listening today. Today we're looking at a really fascinating Substack post. It's titled Internal Architecture, When Speech is Fluent but Architecture is Hidden.
It is a phenomenal piece of writing.
It really is. And, our mission for this discussion today is pretty straightforward. We are going to completely dismantle how you, the listener, view a quote-unquote fluent conversation.
Yes, completely deconstruct it.
Right. We're going to explore why someone who sounds perfectly articulate to you might actually be doing a massive, exhausting amount of invisible mental labor just to get their point across.
It's a dynamic that happens all the time, but we just don't see it.
Exactly. It is a subtle dynamic, but once you see it, it completely changes how you listen to everyone around you, your colleagues, your family, even yourself.
Thankful yourself, yeah.
So, okay, let's unpack this. What exactly is the baseline expectation for how communication is, supposed to work in our society?
Well, the baseline expectation, as the source text really lays it out, is built on what is called an analytic language system.
Analytic, okay.
Right. In our culture, there is a deeply entrenched rule about how reasoning should be presented to other people. The expectation is that reasoning must unfold sequentially, step by step.
Like a timeline.
Exactly like a timeline. When you have a complex idea, you are expected to break that idea down into cleanly sequenced pieces. So you present piece A,
which leads to piece B.
Right, which leads to piece B, which connects to piece C. The goal is to lay down a completely straight logical path so the person listening can easily follow along without having to do any heavy lifting of their own.
Okay, I think I get that. It's a very linear approach. It's like building a brick wall, right?
That's a good way to put it.
Yeah, if I want to show you the wall I've designed, I can't just, drop a massive pile of masonry on your desk.
No, it wouldn't go over well.
Right. Society expects me to hand you the bricks one at a time. Here's the foundation brick. Here is the next brick. Here is the mortar.
The mortar being the transition words, right?
Exactly. The therefores and howevers.
Yeah.
And we build the argument chronologically. But the text suggests that because this step-by-step sequencing is the dominant expectation, we have collectively made a rather massive assumption about how the human brain actually works.
We really have. We assume that because we are required to speak in a sequential, step-by-step manner, human beings must naturally think in a sequential, step-by-step manner.
We equate that output with the internal process.
Yes, precisely. We think the conveyor belt that delivers the words is the same conveyor belt that manufactures the thought. But the author of this piece reveals that this assumption is fundamentally flawed for a very specific group of people.
And this is where it gets really compelling.
It really does. The analytic, brick-by-brick expectation is just one way of processing the world, and it completely ignores the internal reality of what the text calls the Gestalt processor.
The Gestalt processor. Let's focus on that term, because the divergence here is, it's critical. If a brain doesn't formulate thoughts via a step-by-step assembly line, what is the alternative? How does a Gestalt processor actually experience an idea?
Well, for a Gestalt processor, meaning arrives in a completely different format. I actually want to quote directly from the source here to get the phrasing exactly right because it's important.
Yeah, go ahead.
The text states that for these individuals, an idea appears first as a whole pattern, a field of relationships, images, associations.
A field of relationships. Wow. So instead of a sequence of index cards, they are just handed the entire landscape at once.
That's a great visual, yes.
Yeah.
A whole landscape.
But wait, let me play devil's advocate for a second. Is that field of relationships actually coherent? Or is it just a messy brainstorm that they, haven't bothered to organize yet?
That is the million-dollar question.
Because I can totally imagine an analytic thinker arguing that a field of images is just a lazy or unfinished thought.
And that is a very common misconception. But the text addresses it directly. The source explicitly notes that this internal holistic understanding is already internally coherent.
Oh, so it's already done.
Yes. It is completely valid and fully formed. It makes perfect sense to the person experiencing it. The issue isn't the quality or the clarity of the thought.
Right.
The issue is that this deeply coherent pattern is not organized into the linear sequential format that the analytic world demands.
It's not in the right shape.
Exactly. The shape is wrong for the receptacle.
That implies a rather severe friction between the speaker and the listener. Let's move away from the brick wall analogy for a second. It sounds more like trying to explain the plot of a deeply complex 3-hour movie to someone.
Okay, I like where you're going with this.
The Gestalt processor has already watched the whole film. They know the ending, they understand the character arcs, they see how the cinematography reflects the underlying themes. They hold the entire cinematic experience in their mind at once.
Yes, the whole context simultaneously.
But the analytic listener demands that they explain the movie by only describing one single frame of the film at a time, strictly in chronological order.
That is a much more accurate representation of the challenge. You hit the nail on the head. The Gestalt processor holds the entirety of the context concurrently. The listener, however, only accepts information through a narrow, linear funnel.
A very narrow funnel.
Right. And that clash between a holistic internal architecture and a sequential external expectation is where the real struggle occurs. The Gestalt processor cannot simply project their whole pattern into the listener's mind. They are forced to adapt to the dominant system.
Here's where it gets really interesting, because the adaptation you were talking about isn't just a minor adjustment in vocabulary.
Not at all. It's a massive overhaul.
Right. To bridge that gap, the Gestalt processor has to perform a huge secondary cognitive task before they even open their mouths.
Yes. As the text lays out, they have to engage in a rigorous process of translation. And they aren't translating between two spoken languages, like English to Spanish. They are translating between two entirely different architectures of reality.
Moving from concurrent to sequential.
Exactly. Moving from a concurrent, holistic pattern to a sequential, linear output requires highly specific, incredibly demanding labor.
The source breaks this translation labor down into a few distinct phases, right? What does that process actually look like under the hood?
It's basically a three-step process. The first step is unpacking the internal pattern.
So taking the landscape apart.
Right. The Gestalt processor has to look at that simultaneous field of relationships and actively dismantle it. Second, they must select specific pieces of that whole.
Which has to be hard if everything is connected.
It's incredibly difficult. When everything matters equally and concurrently, deciding which single piece of information needs to go first to satisfy an analytic listener is agonizing.
Because in their head, there is no first.
Exactly. There is no first. It all just is. Finally, the third step. They have to arrange those selected pieces into a logical sequence that mimics the step-by-step reasoning the listener expects.
Mimics it. Wow. It is essentially reverse engineering their own insight.
That's a great way to describe it.
If you instantly grasp a complex solution as a complete web of associations, having to backtrack and artificially construct a linear A to B to C pathway just to make it palatable to someone else sounds exhausting.
Exhausting is the right word.
It's like taking a fully rendered 3D architectural model, right?
Yeah.
You can walk through it, see the lighting, feel the space, and then you are forced to draw it out as a series of flat 2D blueprints just so the person across the table can understand what you already see perfectly.
Yes. And that process of flattening a multidimensional thought into a one-dimensional timeline of speech takes a serious toll.
I would imagine.
The text actually points out how this translates into observable behavior. You might notice the speaker having to dramatically slow down their speech rate.
To buy time for the translation.
Exactly. Or you might see them searching for individual words that are buried deep within their larger Gestalt understanding.
The word is lost in the image.
Right. Or they might have to completely reconstruct their reasoning on the fly, creating a narrative that appears sequential, even though their actual arrival at the conclusion was instantaneous.
So they are performing. Yeah, they are putting on a performance of linear thought. They are pretending they walked down a logical staircase step by step, when in reality they just took an elevator straight to the roof.
That is beautifully said. Yes, they took the elevator, but society demands to see the staircase. And they do this simply to comply with the communication rules of the room. What's fascinating here is how the text frames the cost of that performance.
The cost. Right. Let's get into that.
All of this unpacking, selecting, sequencing, and reverse engineering creates what the author identifies as significant cognitive load.
Cognitive load. So their brain is just working overtime.
Working overtime on a secondary task. The brain is running a massive background program. The actual thinking, the arrival at the solution, was already complete.
The math was already done.
Right. The cognitive load is generated entirely by the formatting of the output.
So what does this all mean for the person sitting across the table? Like, if I'm in a meeting and my colleague is a Gestalt processor running this highly demanding translation program in their head, to answer my question, what do I actually perceive as the listener?
This is perhaps the most crucial revelation in the whole text.
Okay.
From your perspective as a listener, you likely perceive none of it.
None of it.
Nothing. You don't see the translation. You don't feel their cognitive load. As the source notes, the sentence eventually arrives.
Eventually arrives, meaning it sounds normal when it gets there.
Exactly. When the Gestalt processor speaks, the explanation they provide appears clear and sequential. You hear a polished, linear sentence, and you assume everything is operating smoothly.
The text calls this the diagnostic blind spot, right?
Yes, the diagnostic blind spot.
And that term feels very deliberate. It's a blind spot because our society's only metric for evaluating communication is the final output. If the grammar is correct and the logic tracks linearly, we label the speaker as fluent.
And because we label them fluent, we assume the process was easy for them. If we connect this to the bigger picture, the danger of this diagnostic blind spot becomes glaringly obvious. We conflate fluency with ease.
Oh, that's huge, conflating fluency with ease.
We assume that if someone speaks smoothly, their internal process must be low effort and straightforward. The listener only ever interacts with the finished sentence.
They never see the kitchen where the meal was cooked.
Right. The rapid-fire, highly demanding translation process that produced that sentence remains entirely invisible beneath the surface of what society deems successful speech.
It's the classic image of a computer processing a heavy task.
Oh, the CPU metaphor. I love this one.
Yeah. The user interface on the screen looks perfectly clean and static, so the user thinks the computer is idling.
But underneath,
But if you open the task manager, the CPU is running at 99%, the cooling fans are spinning, and the system is generating a ton of heat just to keep that clean image on the screen.
that's it, exactly.
The Gestalt processor is running hot, but because they successfully output the linear sentence, they are victims of their own competence.
That is an excellent way to frame it. Victims of their own competence. Their ability to successfully mask their internal architecture actually prevents them from receiving any grace or accommodation from the people around them.
Because nobody knows they need it.
Right. Because the translation stays hidden, the Gestalt processor is held to the exact same energetic standards as the analytic processor.
Even though the workload is totally different.
Completely different. For an analytic thinker, sequential output is a natural, low-effort default. They open their mouths, and the sequence flows because that is how the thought was formed in the first place.
They don't have to translate.
No translation needed. But the Gestalt processor has to dismantle their holistic landscape, select the data, sequence it, and deliver it. And they have to do this often in real time in incredibly fast-paced environments.
Man, and think about what that means in a professional setting.
It's exhausting just thinking about it.
Right. Let's say you are in a high-stakes boardroom. The analytic thinkers are just rapid-firing linear arguments back and forth. Boom, boom, boom.
Bing bong.
Exactly. The Gestalt processor is sitting there, taking in all these linear data points, combining them into a massive, cohesive, multivariable pattern in their head. They see the entire ecosystem of the problem.
They see how everything touches everything else.
Yes. But to interject, they can't just share the ecosystem. They have to stop, slice off a single linear piece of their pattern, format it into a sequential argument, and wait for an opening to speak.
And by the time they have completed that massive internal translation, the conversation has often moved on.
Oh, I've seen that happen so many times.
Or, consider this. If they are asked a direct question and they take a pause to perform that translation, that pause is frequently misinterpreted.
How so?
Well, the analytic world views hesitation as a lack of understanding or a lack of confidence.
Like they don't know the answer.
Exactly. They don't realize the pause is actually the sound of a massive architectural rendering taking place.
A massive architectural rendering, that is a profound inequity. The Gestalt processor is doing twice the work to communicate, but because the labor is invisible, they are often penalized for the slight lag it causes.
Penalized for working harder.
Or worse, they push themselves to translate so quickly and constantly that they hit a wall of burnout and no one around them understands why, because, hey, quote unquote, they always seem to communicate so effortlessly.
The toll of constant translation really cannot be overstated. When you spend your entire life dismantling your natural thought structures just to appease an external expectation, it requires a phenomenal amount of energy.
It's essentially masking.
It is a profound form of masking. The text highlights this beautifully by focusing on the hidden nature of the architecture. The fluency is a veneer, is a necessary adaptation for survival in an analytic dominant society.
And it forces us to reconsider the feedback loops we create in our relationships, too, not just at work.
Oh, absolutely. Personal relationships are deeply affected by this.
If you are arguing with a partner or a friend who is a Gestalt processor, you might get frustrated that they aren't giving you a straightforward, step-by-step reason for why they feel a certain way.
You want the timeline of their anger.
Right. You demand they, quote-unquote, make it make sense in a linear fashion. But their feeling is a complex web of associations. By demanding a linear sequence, you aren't actually asking them to communicate their truth. You are demanding they translate their truth into your preferred format before you'll even validate it.
Which often leads to the Gestalt processor stripping away the most vital nuances of their perspective just to make the idea fit into that linear funnel we talked about.
They have to throw parts of it away.
They do. The translation process inherently requires leaving things out. When you select specific pieces of a whole pattern to arrange into a sequence, you must discard the concurrent relationships that don't fit the timeline.
The casualties of translation.
Exactly. The analytic listener gets a clear sequence, but they receive a severely reduced version of the original insight.
They get the 2D blueprint, but they miss out on the texture, the lighting, and the acoustics of the cathedral.
I love that, yes.
They get the plot summary, but they miss the actual experience of the film.
Precisely. And the tragic irony here is that the analytic listener genuinely believes they have received the full picture.
Because it makes logical sense to them.
Right. Because the sequence satisfies their expectations. The diagnostic blind spot protects the analytic listener's worldview while entirely erasing the Gestalt processor's hidden labor and compromised nuance.
Man, I really want to bring this dynamic directly to you, the listener, because at the start of this deep dive, we promised to change how you hear a fluent conversation.
And hopefully we have.
I want you to take a hard look at your own internal architecture. When you are confronted with a complex problem, how does the solution arrive for you?
That's the real test.
Do you naturally build it step by step, finding comfort in the logical progression of A to B to C? Or do you experience those sudden holistic flashes where you just know the answer, seeing the entire field of variables at once, and then find yourself struggling to explain how you know it to someone else?
Recognizing your own baseline is vital. If you are an analytic processor, acknowledging that your default mode of communication is highly privileged in our society allows you to create space for others.
To give them that pause.
Yes, to allow the pause without judgment. And if you are a Gestalt processor, simply having the vocabulary to name this invisible labor can be incredibly validating.
It gives a name to the exhaustion.
It does. It allows you to understand why certain interactions leave you so drained, even when they seem outwardly successful.
And I really want you to apply this lens to the people you interact with daily. Think about that brilliant coworker who sometimes stumbles over their words when put on the spot. Think about the family member who takes long, thoughtful pauses before answering a seemingly simple question.
They aren't slow.
No. The next time you witness that friction, the slowing down, the searching for words, I challenge you to stop viewing it as a lack of fluency or articulation. Recognize it for what it likely is. It's a massive, real-time architectural translation. They are doing the grueling work of dismantling a beautiful, multidimensional pattern just to hand you information in a format you find comfortable.
This raises an important question, and it is something we all need to consider deeply as we move through the world.
I'm ready.
If perfectly fluent sequential speech is consistently masking such a heavy cognitive load for Gestalt processors, we have to interrogate the cost of our societal demands.
The cost of the funnel.
Exactly. How much brilliant, holistic insight are we actively filtering out of our institutions, our businesses, and our relationships simply because we refuse to accept information that isn't formatted linearly?
We're literally rejecting brilliance because of the packaging.
We are. If a person's ideas naturally exist as a rich field of relationships, how many profound paradigm-shifting connections simply evaporate in the translation process? We demand the linear sequence for our own ease, but in doing so, we might be entirely missing out on the whole picture.
That is exactly the kind of friction we want you to sit with today. The realization that our insistence on the sequential path might be blinding us to the vast, interconnected landscapes of thought that exist right across the table from us.
It's been such a great discussion.
It really has. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. We love unpacking these invisible systems with you, taking the time to look beneath the surface of the things we interact with every single day. Keep questioning your assumptions, pay attention to the silent labor happening around you, and keep exploring the hidden architectures of human connection. Until next time.